Our speaker this evening is a gentleman that I met last year. If you recall the presentation on the Ploesti bombing raid, had dinner with him, had some wonderful stories to tell, and we've had several chances to meet since then. A very, very delightful man from Ohio. I won't go into all of his civilian background, but he flew out of Africa, later flew with the 15th out of Italy, and I won't tell his complete story, but has been a native of Ohio, lived in Minnesota for the last 20 years, delightful person, wonderful storyteller, and I think the thing that I want to emphasize about our presentation this evening, last year when we got started, and it's my own belief, we all just enjoyed the War and Remembrance episodes, and of course, as I mentioned last week, there are an awful lot of historical things on television now with the 50th anniversary of World War II starting now. In fact, with 38 to 88. It's my own personal belief that probably the greatest stories haven't been told and may never be told because they're in the minds of people that lived them, that were there. I think we've all enjoyed Dr. Deutsch's experiences, and he's a wonderful historian. All of the people that we have won't be great historians, but that doesn't mean that they don't have wonderful stories to tell. And with our presentation tonight, will be a full-length presentation. As we look into March, we will be doing an oral history of a couple of people, C.J. Brown and who's the other? C.J. Brown and Ruth Evanoff with the 42nd Division. So before we go any further, good friend Hank Flesh, sir.
Good evening, and Don put it very properly. I am not a historian, I am a storyteller. And what I'm going to tell you tonight is a story. Probably there are people in this room who could duplicate the story or embroider on it, and I will mention the word embroidery for one reason. As time goes by, our minds do wonderful tricks to us. And we are tempted to blow way out of proportion the actual events as they occurred and the experiences we had. What I'm saying is that they age well. And I have been particularly careful in preparing to talk to you tonight to be as accurate as I possibly can. In a very simple language, that means I'm not going to BS you. I'm going to tell you things the way they happened. And as I say, it's a very personal thing that occurred in my life, and a very important part of my life. As for all of you who are veterans, must realize that these were important and significant things in your life. To start out with, I was a member of the 47th Wing, the 449th Bomb Group, the 719th Squadron, Heavy. And we flew B-24s, as we affectionately call them, the giant bird. Now, I'm not going to get into a discussion about the 8th Air Force tonight, because there was an incredible rivalry between my Air Force, the 15th, which was based in Italy and Africa, and as what we referred to, the glorious 8th, which was based in England. Our resentments, such as we had, were based on the fact that they seemed to get all the publicity, and we seemed to get the hell shot out of us. Now, in no way am I taking away from those early pioneers in the 8th who flew unescorted, small missions to begin with, longer missions, and had horrendous casualties. I have the greatest respect for them. But it is an accepted fact that there was a rivalry between the two air forces. We started in Africa. We were a spin-off of the 8th Air Force. We were sort of the forgotten brother, and we were sent down to Africa at the time of the invasion of Africa, and we started to bomb out of the desert. And we didn't do a lot of very good things down there, but one very spectacular thing did happen. I first became acquainted with this program here when I went to hear the lecture on the Ploesti oil field raid. And unfortunately, in most people's mind, they think of the Ploesti oil field raid as the one that was described that night, which was flown out of Africa after a very long period of practice bombing out in the desert. They actually reconstructed many of the refineries and practice on it. And the whole purpose of the mission was to go in very, very low. They do not realize that after that original low-level raid in early 1943, the 15th Air Force went back, after they were based in Italy, over 18 times to bomb the Ploesti oil fields. Now, I would love to be able to tell you we wiped them out, and that's what the newspapers would infer, but we didn't wipe them out. After our most effective raids, approximately 10 days would pass, and they would be back in action again. Admittedly, with a limited quantity compared to what they have, but nothing dramatic. And actually, when they finally fell to the Russians in August, late August of 1944, they were still able to produce oil. It was an incredibly important target, as were all the oil plants in Germany, the cracking plants, the refineries, because it supplied the fuel for the tanks, for all their motorized vehicles, for their Air Force, the whole shop. At any rate, this original raid was a brilliantly conceived idea that was terribly executed. I won't take you through the whole low-level raid again, but it was a foul-up, and it was the worst loss that they had ever had in the 15th Air Force at that point. They lost 50% of the force. The lead navigator screwed up, was then killed. You had planes coming over the target, flying into delayed action bombs that had been dropped by the group that was ahead of them and blowing up from the concussion of those. You had planes coming in on a collision course. No Air Force guy can talk without his hands, so bear with me. But we had one group coming in this way, one group coming in that way, and meeting over the target. So it was a disaster. Well, later on, as Italy fell, we moved up, and I happened to be based in the southernmost part of Italy, near the town of Taranto, Taranto. And that was a very large harbor that was subsequently bombed by the British, and the Italian Navy was wiped out there. It was the Italians' version of Pearl Harbor. But we were based in a little town called Grottaglia, approximately 20 miles from Toronto. And out of there we operated. We flew across the Adriatic a very, very long way into Romania to hit the Ploesti oil fields. We flew very far north, up the Adriatic, to such targets as Munich and Regensburg and Blechheimer and the Moose Beer Bomb oil refineries in northern Vienna, or in northern Austria. After Ploesti fell, our primary targets were in northern Austria and Germany. And the target of Vienna was the second most heavily defended target in Europe. They had over 375 heavy flak guns, which meant they could shoot up to 45,000 feet there. It was ringed with guns. Ploesti was a smaller area than Vienna, and they had about 250 flak guns, and they also had considerable Luftwaffe there, as did Vienna. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that towards the end of 1944 there was no Luftwaffe left. That is not true. As a matter of fact, German aircraft production was rising at the end of the war. They were crippled to a degree by fuel. They were crippled by less experienced pilots. But anyone who ever believed that all we had were milk runs and our only opposition was flak at the targets, which God knows was bad enough, we had plenty of attacks by enemy aircraft, principally Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s. We even had encounters with the very famous Abbeville Kids, which was Hermann Goering's crack squadron of yellow-nosed Focke-Wulf 190s, and they were a terror, I can assure you. Well, I'm talking tonight on an Air Force officer's experiences as a cavalry officer, which doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense, I'm sure to you. So for a very short background, although I was born in Ohio, I spent a great deal of my time as a cowboy in Montana when I was a young man. I used to be on the rodeo circuit. I rode a lot, punched a lot of cows, and as a matter of fact, I still do. So I was very much into horses. Meantime, I'm in the Air Force, and I'm sent over in typical Air Force fashion. I picked up a brand new B-24 in Hamilton Field in San Francisco, California, and I was issued jungle kits complete with machetes and mosquito repellent and mosquito net, and guess where I ended up? Bangor, Maine. But that's the way it goes, you know, and then we flew across to the Azores, and from the Azores to Africa. We fooled around Africa for a while, and then we went into Italy. Our field was very interesting because it had been Italy's dirigible base. And there were two gigantic skeletons of dirigible hangars there. And we had a very interesting experience. All of the metal covering had been shot off them in the various bombings and fighting that went on. And one day a hot dog P-51 pilot came roaring down over the field. They loved to buzz our fields to show we stupid guys in the bombers what it was like to be wild and free in the air. And these guys would crank it up and hit about 450 knots and come roaring right down the runway, split us up off of that thing, come on around and zap us again. And that was to really impress us. Well, this guy impressed the hell out of us one day because he got very daring. And here sat this great conical hangar, and he came down and he zapped right through it. Well, there was one thing he forgot. There was a wire stretched over the end. And he hit that at 450 knots, and his engine kept going, and he didn't. Now, it's tragic. The guy was obviously killed. But it shows the kind of crazy daredevil way that we all had. I was 22 years old, and I thought I had the world by the tail. I'd like to say at this point that I was blessed in many, many ways. If I weren't blessed, I wouldn't be here tonight. But I was blessed in having an absolutely superb crew. My pilot went on after the war, joined United Airlines, and just retired as a senior pilot, the senior check pilot for them, and was the most magnificent man I have ever known in my life, and I owe my life to him so many times I can't begin to tell you what he means to me. We were very close. My bombardier is still a close, close friend of mine. Incidentally, I was a navigator. Our co-pilot was a frustrated fighter pilot. He's the only one we had trouble with because he constantly wanted to do a chandelle off the end of the runway with a full bomb load. And therefore, we didn't let him fly very often, and we always prayed devoutly that our pilot would not be seriously injured, so he had to shoot a landing. The rest of the crew were just excellent men, and although 3 of them are dead, now I've kept in touch with all of them, and we've become close, close friends. We were close, close friends, and we've become closer as the years went by. We arrived over there at the end of July of 1944, just in time to participate in the end of the Ploiesti raids. And 2 of my very first missions were to Ploiesti, and I can't begin to tell you. If you were learning to dive, and in teaching you, they said jump off the board that's 75 feet high. That's the closest equivalent I can give you as to the experience of going on your first combat mission into a target like Ploiesti. I was too dumb to know enough to be scared. The first time I looked at the flak over Ploiesti, and you came into the target, the first thing they had, and I do have a few pictures I'll show you at the end that will illustrate this, but the first thing you saw was a gigantic smoke screen over the entire target. They had these smoke pots they had put out, and it was just solid, so we had to bomb with what we called Mickey, which was radar. A half-ass kind of radar, to be frank with you, but it was better than just hoping to God you hit something. It was reasonably accurate. If you could see a river and a crook in the river, you could target on that and get a fairly accurate shot. We were hit by fighters all the way in, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought they were our escorts. Then I found out we didn't have an escort. And that is a real confidence builder, I'll tell you. And suddenly I see these damn little things come swooping in at me, and I suddenly hear guns firing, and the whole aircraft is shuddering. And I think, wait a minute. It was like a movie, only I was there. And I felt very strangely about it. Finally, we dumped our bombs, but before we dumped our bombs, I shall never forget looking out and seeing this tremendous black cumulonimbus cloud right over the target. And I thought, this is bad enough, for God's sake. They got a smoke screen down there, and now God is against us. We've got a cumulonimbus thunderstorm right over the top of us. That, ladies and gentlemen, was my first encounter with flak, and I couldn't believe it. What I thought was a cumulonimbus cloud was the smoke from these boxes and boxes and boxes. They fired these things in boxes, 4 guns that just shoot them up, and you'd go right through this stuff. It was the smoke from the shell that had exploded. I also felt there was extreme turbulence there because the airplane kept rocking and bumping when we'd been flying a straight and level course. That was flak, that was concussions, but I was too dumb to know. Well, the second mission, I was a little bit more sophisticated, and therefore I was considerably scared. In fact, I was scared to death. But somehow I got through it, and I was flying the tail end Charlie. We flew 7 ship boxes in those days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm at the rear end. Now the theory is they shoot at the lead ship, and they invariably hit the 7th, the last one. And it was true. And that was the first time I had a real appreciation for my pilot, because we had our entire hydraulic system shot out, and when we finally limped home to land, we had no brakes, we had no flaps, and how we ever got it down, we popped a couple of chutes. We tied parachutes onto the 2 waist windows of the aircraft, and as we hit the ground, it's like a drag racer. We popped the chutes. Some of you are smiling like you know what I'm talking about. And the chutes would open up and act as a drag. We had also drained a little fluid out of the rear turret and were able to get 1 application of the brakes, but we made it safely, so my faith in the pilot was very, very high. I might say at this point that I'm not sure that my crew's faith in me was quite as high as my faith in the pilot, because when we were flying the Atlantic to get there, we took off from Bangor, Maine, and flew to what was called in those days Bluey West 1 up in Newfoundland, and from there we hopped to the Azores. We took off from Bluey West 1 in the middle of the night, and I was going to have my wonderful proficiency as a celestial navigator tested, because I was going to fly over 3,000 miles of ocean out to the Azore Islands, which were a speck. On a B-24, the pilot and co-pilot sit looking down on the nose, and the navigator is up in the front of the nose, and halfway between them is the Astrodome, a little plastic bubble where you were supposed to sit up with your octave and shoot the stars. To reach that, I had to stand on a 50 caliber ammunition box, which I did. I am beautifully profiled. The pilot's looking right down on me, the co-pilot's looking right down on me. And here I stand with my little octave shooting the stars. Confidence, boys, your navigator is at work. Well, I'll be damned if I didn't drop the octave. Now, the octave's a very delicate instrument. Pilot comes out, what the hell happened, Hank? I said, I dropped the octave, but don't worry. I get back up on the box again, I start to shoot, and would you believe it, I dropped it again. To make a long story short, I dropped that octave 3 times. That was nothing but nerves. By a miracle, we split the Azores and were within half a minute of my ETA, and I think if the octave had been accurate, we wouldn't have made it. It's not exactly something that builds up a lot of confidence in a navigator at that point in time. Now, I might add, that is the last time I ever had to use that octave, because we used what I call pinpoint pilotage from 25,000 feet, which meant you looked at a landmark on the ground and were able to identify Tilly's toilet down there and knew that's where you were. Now, if you think that's accuracy, we worked on direct navigation, what we call DR, and then we would pick up little towns or bends in the rivers and plot it. So as time went on, they had a little bit more confidence in me. We were an excellent crew. We really were very blessed, and we were made a lead crew in a very, very rapid time. Lead crew means that you led your squadron of 7 planes. If you were a squadron lead, you then graduated to group lead. It meant you led the 28 planes that were in your group. And we eventually became that. In fact, very early in the ball game, and it took us quite a long time to get our missions in, because they didn't fly lead crews that regularly. In the meantime, I was young, eager, and unmarried, and thought I was the world's greatest stud, and I also thought I was the world's greatest flyboy that ever came along the pipe. And we shared this field with the British. On one side of the field were Spitfires that did fighter sweeps into Yugoslavia, and Wellington Bombers, the old first-line twin-engine bomber that had been around since, I think, World War I practically, and they were built out of canvas and wood and carried 30 caliber guns. But at any rate, I'd become very good friends with a number of the British. And for some reason, Navigators were always in very short supply. So my British friend said to me, I used to go over there and drink with him. And I was a Scotch drinker. We didn't have anything except Black Label Shenley, which I hated. I'd go over with the British and drink with them, and I got very good Scotch over there, so we became damn good friends. At any rate, one night they said, why don't you go off on a night mission? You don't know what it's really like to fly at night. They flew at night, and they flew single penetration missions. We flew in the daytime. We'd have anywhere from 700 to 800 airplanes in the Air Force hitting a target. They flew one at a time, and they'd go into a target, and they had a Beaufighter, which was a little twin-engine all-purpose fighter they had. The Bullfighter would go in low, or a Mosquito would go in low, and they'd drop flares all over the targets. Then the British would go over one plane at a time and drop on the fires that were lit up by the Pathfinders. Well, to show how stupid I was, I thought this has got to be part of my experience as a flyboy. I've really got to learn about this night one. So, to make a long story short, I ended up flying 11 missions with the British, which I would have had my ass in the damnedest sling you have ever known in your life if I had ever been discovered by my superior officers in the American Air Force. But my days I wasn't flying were my own time, and they didn't know the difference. It was an experience that I would not trade for anything in the world. It was entirely different. They were wonderful people. It was an entirely different effect than what we had in daytime bombing, and it's something I will always cherish. I got nothing for it. Yes, I did get something. I was given the Royal Air Force patch, which I still wear to this day, and I feel I earned. I don't have their wings, but if I flew 11 missions and they gave it to me, damned if I'm not going to wear it. And it used to be good for an awful lot of drinks at a bar when I'd walk in with that RAF patch on me. Oh, yes. Yank with the RAF. You got it, man. There we were. At any rate, it was a marvelous experience. I tell you that part of it only because later on in my story you're going to see how it all ties in together. At any rate, after two Ploiesti raids, Ploiesti fell. The Russians were coming. And we used to sit there like a bunch of high school cheerleaders. Come on, Big Red, let's go, get it. Because that was a horrendous target. Finally it fell, and the celebration was beyond belief. So one of the first things we had to do was fly over and get 1,500 guys who had been prisoners by those raids out of Romania. I'm going to say a very strange thing had happened. When they flew over there, and I did not happen to be one who went over to pick them up, but some of my close friends did. When they flew over there to bring them out, would you believe there were some guys who didn't want to leave? First of all, Romanian women are exceptionally good looking. On top of that, they were exceptionally amorous. And to be very blunt about it, a number of my friends over there had shack jobs they didn't want to give up, and they didn't want to come back. But they were forced to come back, and we just had one hell of a celebration. I'll tell you, when they came back, it was marvelous. And we enjoyed it immensely. Well, time progressed, and Ploiesti had fallen. We thought, what a relief. There won't be anything like that. We had not, at that point in the ball game, gone to the city of music, the city of the waltz, the city of Franz Joseph Strauss. We didn't know about Viennese waltzing and things like that. We didn't know about 375 heavy flak guns either. So guess what happened? My first trip in deputy lead. Now, deputy lead means you're on the way, man. You're sitting right next to that lead ship. My first trip as deputy lead was to Vienna. Now, I'll tell you all something. I thought the flak in Ploiesti was horrible, and it was. But when I saw Vienna, I couldn't believe it. And I have a couple of pictures that will give you a clue later on. It was incredible. To make a short story long, I went to Vienna 8 more times after that. I went to Munich 3 times. But the story I'm here to tell you about tonight has to do with a mission I flew to Vienna shortly after we had become deputy lead crews. It was a cold but clear October day, Friday, the 13th of October, 1944. The mission was our 13th. I will digress a moment to tell you how interesting Friday the 13th has been in my personal life. Subsequently, I led the entire Air Force on Friday, February 13th, and for that I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. It was a significant thing for me, Friday the 13th. I've been married 3 times, and the first 2 were born on Friday the 13th. The last one was born on Friday the 14th. I'm a slow learner. At any rate, get the picture. A beautiful, crisp October day, Friday the 13th, and at 3 a.m. in the morning we're awakened, as we always were. You could hear the engines running up, down on the flight line. We go down to our briefing. We go into the briefing room, and it's this big thing up here like that, big maps, and you look at it, and here is this trail of green thread, and it goes up and up and up and up and up forever. It ends up in the city of Vienna, and everyone says, oh, God. And then they come on, and these wonderfully optimistic people will get up there who are briefing you on your opposition. They say, now, as you know, there are several guns around Vienna, 375 to be exact. However, you've got this wonderful material called window. Window is nothing except Christmas tinsel that you threw out of the airplane that was supposed to screw the radar up. And to this day, I don't know if it does or doesn't. But you have window, and you aren't going to have to worry about fighter pilots, because although there are 385 planes within the area of Vienna, these fighter pilots are young and inexperienced. Now that heartened me greatly. I thought, my God, I'm a veteran. What can an inexperienced fighter pilot do? We hang on all sorts of threads, you know. At any rate, one of the things that we had to do, we went into the Navigator, went into what was called the secret room. And in the secret room was a map of Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia, for some of you who are younger and don't know too much about history, was a country that was thrown together after World War I, and it consists of Serbs and Croatians and Montenegrins and God knows what else. And they slammed it together into one country, and there was all kinds of fighting internally in the country. They had one common enemy, the Germans. But I'd like to spell out a couple of things about it. When I was still back in the States, there was a movie that came out called Fighting Chetniks, and it had, God knows who, Randolph Scott, I think, played the lead or something. And it was all about these wonderful followers of General Mihailovich, who had been Prime Minister under King Peter of Yugoslavia before it became a so-called democracy. Mihailovich was fighting the Germans with his Chetniks. They had vowed that they would never shave until the Germans were defeated. That was great. These are friendly guys up there. Meantime, I get over to Italy, and all we hear about is now if you get shot down and you got a chance, get down into Yugoslavia and be with the partisans. Partisans? Who in the hell are the partisans? Well, that's Marshal Joseph Broz, known as Tito's men. Well, the bottom line is this. Mihailovich and the Chetniks were monarchists. Tito was a communist, with the full backing of the Russians. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin had gotten together, and although our support had been with the Chetniks at the beginning of the war, we switched, so often we did, in midstream, and went with the partisans. Now, the partisans and Chetniks hate each other. I mean, they kill each other. Someone back there must have known him because he's nodding. They hated each other. At any rate, we go into this secret room, and here is a map of Yugoslavia, and it showed certain shaded areas where the partisans were supposed to be in control. Supposed to be. So the idea was, if you were shot down, if you had to walk out, try and head towards one of those areas, a so-called, quote, safe area. Fine. I asked a dumb question. I said, what happens if I get with the Chetniks? God forbid that that should happen. Well, I said, they're better than the Germans, aren't they? Well, we don't know, but by all means, don't get with the Ustashi. Now, the Ustashi were way down in the southern part of Yugoslavia, and they were the most unmitigated bastards that ever came down the pipe. Now, I'm not exaggerating. They were the fascists. They were hand in glove with the Germans, and a friend of mine, and this is a sad story, but true, was shot down the same day I was captured by the Ustashi. We ultimately found out he had been spread-eagled, his testicles and penis had been cut off and stuffed in his mouth, was left to bleed to death. Now that's the kind of people you were dealing with when you were hooked in with the Ustashi. So you're damn better off to drown in the Adriatic than get near where the Ustashi hung out. At any rate, I go down and I look at the secret room and I come back to my crew brimming with confidence. And I had a habit. Everyone had to have time for, as we nicely put it, their daily toilet before we left. And I would go up to my enlisted man's tent and sort of have a little pep talk with him. And I'd go in, oh, gee, Wesley, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine, blah, blah, you know, just going on and on. I had one gunner, by the name of Dick Kimberly, who came from Texas. He was a ball turret gunner. He was a short guy. You had to be short to fly on a ball turret. You had to be nuts, too. At any rate, he used to read the Bible every morning. He'd open the Bible, flip to random like that, and what he read he thought was going to tell his fortune for the day. Now, this, so help me God, is a true story. I go into him, I talk to the other guys, I come over to Dick, I said, what's the Bible got to say, Dick? He says, read it, Lieutenant. I read the damn thing, and it's from Acts chapter 11, and I'm quoting it damn near verbatim. And I was in the city of Joppa praying, and there came a vision unto me of a great sheet let down from the heavens by its four corners, and it came even unto me. Well, I looked at that damn thing. He said, what's it mean? Oh, it doesn't mean a damn thing, Dick, forget it. All of a sudden, I got a vision of a sheet coming down by four corners. What's that look like to an Air Force guy? It means parachute. Well, I couldn't believe it. I said, screw it, that doesn't mean anything anyway. So we get down the plane, we run up our engines, we take off single file, one right after another. We zapped off, and we all got airborne. Then you'd fly around in circles, for God's sake, to what they call the rendezvous point. You climbed up to 10,000 feet, and it was at that point the 7 planes were supposed to get in formation, and a tight formation, and then the 4 formations of 7 planes each would follow each other up to the target. Formations were obviously for protection. So we started on up towards Vienna, long damn way. We were carrying 10 500-pound bombs that day. And we chugged along, and I was getting my checkpoints and calling into Warren, my pilot said, everything's fine, Warren, don't sweat about it. The temperature, by the way, was 50 degrees below Fahrenheit. And it's very damn cold, 50 below in an airplane with the wind whipping through it. It's not like the pressurized cabins today. It's so cold that you wore silk gloves. If your skin touched metal, it would stick to the metal and the skin would just peel off. It was hell on gunners and navigators who had to use their fingers. So anyway, we're chugging up there, and I hit all my checkpoints, and we were coming up to the initial point. Now, I digress for one moment to tell you that the lead ship was being flown by a gentleman by the name of Colonel Jack Randolph. Now, to give you a small indication of Colonel Jack Randolph, this was 1944, and he was a colonel. He retired from the Air Force in 1970, and guess what he was? He was still a colonel. At any rate, Colonel Randolph was leading the aircraft, the lead ship. We came up to Vienna, and the initial point is a place about 15 or 20 minutes, supposed to be 10 minutes, it was usually 15 or 20 minutes away from the target. And at that point, each one of these boxes of 7 would fall in at the initial point, head right towards the target. The next box would fall in behind it, the next behind that, so you had 4 of them of 28. Then the rest of the Air Force would trail along behind you. Or if you were at the end, you would be trailing along behind the rest of the Air Force. The idea was each group of 7 planes dropped on the lead bombardier, so you get boom, 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 and it go on all day. We come up the initial point, and it's pretty clear and everything's fine. My bombardier's over his northern bomb site, screwing around with that, and I'm sitting back, and I had, at that point, the Navigator, once he had him on the initial point, he didn't have anything to do anymore except pray. And I would be there, and I'm kind of sitting there looking at all this flag. Dear God, get me out of this. Dear God, get me out of this. That's what I'd say. It became a litany with me. Dear God, get me out of this. And I mean, you act funny ways. When you have nothing to do, you're worse off than if you have something to do. So at any rate, I'm dear Godding it. He's working his bomb site. All of a sudden, he says, I got the target in view. He said, God damn it. He said, there's a cloud coming in front of us. Well, I said, let's see what the lead ship does. We get right over the damn target, and the flak is going kerplung, kerplung, and boom! Plane off on our left side blows up in midair. The plane behind us blows up in midair. So 2 out of the 7 are gone. And all of a sudden, we get a call over the command radio, rally right. Now, a rally is what you do when you've dumped your bombs. You get the hell out of there as fast as you can. And they have a predetermined course that allegedly gets you out of the flak rapidly. Fine. Thank God, we still got our bombs. We're going to get out of there. Zap, we're going off on a rally, and all of a sudden we get the word, return to the IP. Now, ladies and gentlemen, returning to the IP is never done. You don't do things, because when you're on that IP, you're flying at a set altitude, at a set airspeed, and a set course. They got you figured 18 ways to hell at that point. So we circle a 360-degree turn over the city with 375 flak guns tracking us all the way and shooting the bejesus out of everyone. Come back to the IP and go down the bomb run again with the orders to bomb by Pathfinder or Mickey. I couldn't believe it. By this time, I am really scared. I mean, I am panic-filled. And we all are. Now, mind you, we've lost 2 planes on the first go-round. We lose 2 more planes on the second go-round. So of the 7 original aircraft went over, there are 3 of us come off. Meantime, we are lumped all over the place, and our airplane is shaking like hell, and we're beginning to see holes that ain't supposed to be there. We come off the target, and Warren, my pilot, says, I've lost 1 engine. They feathered it. He said, I'm about to lose another, and one of our elephant ears is blown off. B-24 has 2 rudders on it, big round thing sticking on the back, and one of them has been shot off. So we had damn little control of the aircraft. This is a bad situation because you're falling out of formation, and as soon as you come off the target, you've been harassed with fighters coming in, but when you come off the target, they're looking for every lame duck they can find. So zap, they're coming at us. So I said, Warren, how long do you think we can fly? He said, God knows. I said, okay, here's the heading for a so-called safe area in Yugoslavia. Cut the story a little briefly. We got hit by fighters just when it looked like they were going to get us. We had 2 engines out. We had 1 elephant ear blown off. How this man could handle his aircraft, I'll never know. Just as it looked like the fighters were going to come in and knock us off, all of a sudden the greatest sight in the world came. There were about 25 P-51s came roaring in. It was an interesting thing. This 312 Pursuit Group were the only black fighter pilots in the war, and they were magnificent pilots and magnificent men. And they came in, they had checkerboards all over the tails, and they came roaring in on us, and they ran those bandits right to hell off, which delighted us. So here we are, heading south, down towards the Yugoslav border. Well, pretty soon, we've been flown a long time, it seemed to me, and I was trying to chart a course, which was pretty tough with all that was going on, and I figured we were about 50 miles from the border. When Warren, my pilot, got on the intercom, he says, well, boys, he says, I've gotten about all I can get out of this horse. He says, we better bail out. And he said, Hank, you and Dale was my bombardier, get out of that nose and go back to the waist and dive out the camera hatch. We The pilots wore seat chutes. They sat on them. We had little bundles like that. We snapped on the front of our suits. We carried it in our hand. So to get to the tunnel, we had to, or get to the nose of the B-24, you crawled through a tunnel about that square, clear back, and then when you came out, you looked up on the flight deck. I looked up at Warren when I came out. I said, there was a phrase that most of you won't know, but some of you will know. During the war, they always said, trying to get people to preserve gas, they'd say, is this trip necessary? I looked up at Warren. I said, Warren, is this trip necessary? And he said, shoot. He never swore, unlike me. He said, shoot. No use giving the Germans an airplane. Whatever. So I go back through the bomb bays, back into the waist, and the boys are all sitting around. They said, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to get the hell out of here. At that point, she starts to burn a little bit. So we dive out head first, right through that camera hatch. In the meantime, there were some very ugly people on the ground who were shooting 20 millimeters at us. We were at about 20,000 feet, so all we could see were the black puffs of smoke before, but we knew we weren't exactly in what you'd call friendly territory. I had told the crew I thought we were about 40 miles from the border, and to head south. Anyway, I did a delayed action jump because I did not want to be hanging up there like a stuffed goose, and I fell approximately 10,000 feet and then pulled my ripcord. And in typical fashion, I'd done some very stupid things that day. We always carried a GI 45 automatic in a shoulder holster. I had forgotten it that morning. By the way, I neglected to say it was exactly on Friday the 13th, on our 13th mission, at 1300 hours that we bailed out. And that's not coincidence, just the way it happened. Anyway, I pulled off my ripcord, and the other thing I hadn't done was tighten the straps around my legs. And I'll tell you, I talked like that for about 2 minutes. All of a sudden, here I am, hanging up there. What the hell are you doing here? A little boy from Ohio? You're up here over Yugoslavia or Austria and people are shooting at you and you're hanging in a parachute? This ain't real. It was real. Then I looked out and I could see these other chutes opening and floating. Another 10 men on the crew. And I began to count, and then I saw our airplane going off, flying on its level, and then beginning to dive off in that area. Crashing. I got out there and I counted the damn chutes. There were only 9 chutes. And I'm hanging up there and the tears are streaming down my face. My dear friend Warren has gone down with the ship. Well, I'd forgotten to count me. Which is a very natural thing under the circumstances, but you certainly felt like an idiot at the time you realized it. Meantime, I'm getting in touch with reality because there's some shells blowing around me. Matter of fact, one of our gunners got a 20 millimeter shell right through his chute. Still made it down. The wind, fortunately, was blowing us away from it. But I began, the most impressive thing is the silence that you hear up there. All you hear is the wind whistling through the shroud cords of your parachute. And we didn't have these wonderful, great big chutes with the panels in and all this and that. You don't float down real gently in a GI chute in World War II. You come down right hard. So I'm thinking, for God's sake, what if I break a leg? You know, borrowed trouble. And I remember now, let's see, I never jumped out of a plane. They had us jump off the back of the truck. When we hit, we were supposed to pull up on the chute, you know, and blah, blah, blah. God. The next thing I hear are cows moving, and I hear chickens, and I hear roosters. Well, at least we're in a farmland. The next thing I know, that ground is coming up really fast. Well, I'll be damned, I lit on the side of a haystack. And it slid down the haystack. God, what a sense of relief. Immediately, just like the movies. I'm out of that chute, rolling it up so they won't find my chute anywhere. All of a sudden, I see 4 or 5 peasant-type people, farm-type people with pitchforks, wooden pitchforks in their hand. They're running at me. I reach for my 45, and I grab my armpit. Oh, I forgot that. Amerikansky, ha-ha. Friendly Henry. First person to reach me was a woman. She throws her arms around me and kisses me, and I maintain to this day I'm the only man who ever got kissed within 30 seconds after hitting the ground from a distressed aircraft and bailing out of 20,000 feet. Now, I would love to tell you it was Sophia Loren, It was not. But it was a very motherly type woman. She immediately took me to her house. She took me down in the basement, and she hid me behind a whole bunch of wine or vinegar barrels, huge things, and straw. She scraped it back. There was a hole underneath there, and I crawled underneath the hole. She shoved the straw back, the barrels in front of it, ran upstairs. Soon after that, clump, 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 a whole group of Germans searching for us on motorcycles and trucks came through. We're searching every house and village. Now, I'd like to impress upon you, this woman, it turned out we were actually right on the border of Yugoslavia and Austria. Austria, of course, was covered with Germans. Most of Yugoslavia was. This peasant woman risked her own life to save mine. And it's something I'll never forget as long as I live. I am here today. Oh, I might have made a prison camp like my friend Charlie over here did. But she saved my life. They did not hang around very long because they knew that there was partisan, I found out later, partisan efforts going on in the area. So the Germans would come in and search and try and pick up a prisoner and get the hell out of there. Okay. I came out of the basement. Of course, I couldn't speak a word of Yugoslavia. She couldn't speak any English. I thanked her. I kissed her again, and I took off. Now, we were in the mountains. Very rugged country, very much like my beloved Montana mountains. I felt quite at home. And I took off, got into the heavy woods there, and I was into the mountains heading south. Now, I had shed my heavy flying suit, my electric flying suit that I had on. But I did have on my flight boots, which were fur-lined. You wore fur-lined flight boots over your electrical suits if you were smart. And you've got extra large sizes. Thank God I'd done one thing right. I had my GI shoes on underneath, because you always figured if you had to walk out walking in fleece-lined boots was the fits. Anyway, I started walking. I walked, oh gosh, into these thick, thick woods from this little valley where the family had been. I was in the mountains immediately. I walked about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and heavy, heavy pines and oak and all this stuff up in the mountains. And all of a sudden this voice says, "Hank, for Christ's sake, come here." Now, can you imagine? You're 650 miles up, you've just been kissed, for God's sake. There's enemy all around you, people have been shooting at you, and a voice says, "Hank, for Christ's sake, come here." Where? "I'm over here, for God's sake, look up." I looked up, and there hanging in a tree is my co-pilot. Hanging in a tree. His chute had hung up. He said, "For God's sake, get me out of here." Well, somehow or other, I was able to climb the tree, and I did have a knife in my pocket, and I was able to cut his shroud lines loose, and he dropped to the ground without busting anything. However, he had one problem. He didn't wear GI shoes underneath his flying boots, and all he had on were his fleece-lined flying boots, and he only had one of those on. So I immediately got out of my fleece-lined boots, which I was getting tired of anyway, and gave it to him so he at least could walk. So off we take for a walk on the wild side. We stayed in the mountains. We slept one night, 2 nights, and believe me, in October it's cold up there in those mountains. We had no blankets. We cover ourselves up with leaves, drank in the little brooks, hoped to God we didn't run anyone. So after 2 days of that, we're walking through the woods when all of a sudden we were surrounded by 8 guys with guns. Once again, Amerikansky, flyboys, you know. These guys had on gray uniforms, gray hats, and they had a red star on them. I said, they can't be all bad, red star. They were the Yugoslav partisans. Well, by this time we were started. They took us down another valley, I guess half a day's walk. We got down there, and here was sort of a big farmyard and a barn. And there must have been, 75 or 80 partisan soldiers there. And we bumped into the rest of our crew. One fella had broken his leg, and he was in real pain, and we managed to set his leg. We blew up our Mae West, which were the life vests we wore, blew them up to cushion them, shot him full of morphine, and got him into sort of a half-ass field hospital they had there. By this time, we're starving, and apparently the Yugoslav in charge, who seemed to be a colonel, did that. Yeah, we're damn hungry. We went in, they gave us some very, very dark bread. But before they gave us the bread and the soup, which is about all we had, I'm a smoker. By God, I didn't have any cigarettes. I saw these guys smoking, and guess what they were smoking? Yugoslav tobacco grown in the mountain. They grind it up with their hands and roll it up in newspapers. So I had a Yugoslav cigarette. Gee, Christmas. I mean, heavy. But at any rate, then we go into this room, and on the walls there's a table, everything. My God, we're going to get to eat on like everywhere else. They had the 5 leaders: Chiang-Kai-shek, Tito, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. They all had pictures of them, posters, like wanted posters, for God's sake. They had them all up on the wall of this room in this barn. For that, the guy comes out with a great big jug. He comes out with some tumblers, glasses, pours each one of us right up to the top with his clear liquid. I found out later it was fermented plum skins. And the closest approximation I can get to what it's called, and don't ask me to pronounce it, sounded like drotka, which sounds like rot gut. And I don't know if any of y'all ever drank moonshine down in the hills of Kentucky or anywhere like that, but that made Kentucky moonshine taste like the finest French wine. Now, my pilot, for religious reasons, didn't drink. Now remember, none of us spoke English, or spoke Yugoslav, but I had a smattering of schoolboy French. The Yugoslav colonel had a smattering of schoolboy French. So you should have heard our conversations, and if you've ever tried to explain in schoolboy French to a Yugoslav colonel who speaks schoolboy French that your pilot doesn't drink because of religious reasons, ponder that for a moment. It ain't easy. And you see, it's an insult over there not to drink with him, because we drank a toast to each one of the 5 leaders. The first shot I took of that stuff, and I thought I was a pretty good drinker, damn near blew the top of my head off. And it's the first time in my life I ever faked drinking. It's the first time I ever faked drinking, because I would have been so bombed. Well, thank God I found out later on, if you got bombed in the Yugoslav army, it was practically a death penalty. They didn't put up with it. Now, these were neat people. So we got through our toast somehow or another. And they then served us this very coarse brown bread that tasted like the finest meal I ever had in my life, in some kind of watery soup, and that held us. Well, finally, they came up with a young guy who must have been 17 years of age. Now, you got to get your history in perspective here. None of us had ever heard of the death camps. None of us had ever heard of the Holocaust. None of us even knew that the ovens existed. There had never been a word said about them. This young man was a handsome young man, spoke impeccable English, thank God. And he was assigned to our group. So then we were able to communicate. It turned out that he had fled Germany, that his mother, his father, his grandfather, his grandmother, and his 2 sisters had been put to death in the death camps. What are you talking about, death camps? He was Jewish. We couldn't believe these stories. And he had escaped by hiding under dead bodies, and had gotten down to Yugoslavia and was fighting with the partisans. Well, Jim, I don't know what his real name was, later on, after the war in about 1950, I ran into him in New York City, of all places. That's how strange life is. His real name was Imre Rockflesh, but we call him Jim. So Jim said, "You're going to be kept here, and when we can, we're going to try and get you with the Russians who are flying guns into us. But we don't know how long it'll be. In the meantime, stay out of sight. We may have to hide you at any moment. We're going to have to take you about 250 miles over towards Zagreb, which was the big capital of the town, the biggest city there. And we don't know how we're going to do it, but we'll do it some way. Okay. As I told you, I was reckless. I volunteered to fly with the RAF, and I was full of vim and vigor, and I still, even after this experience, to me it was like being in a movie, only I was the star. And I noticed that they had a hell of a bunch of good-looking horses there. So I said to Jim, what are the horses? Oh, he said, this is a cavalry unit. Well, I said, hell, I'm an old cowboy. And I said, I'm really experienced. I said, I got a hell of an idea. I think I know approximately where our plane crashed, and I don't think it burned because we'd run out of gas at the last minute. And I said, on that thing, there are a whole bunch of 50 caliber machine guns and ammunition which you guys could use. Oh, Jesus, that's a wonderful idea. So, how do you want to get there? I said, I love horses. So we go over and they give me a horse. And I mount him, and it's sort of like an Eastern saddle, a little bit different than an Eastern saddle, but very similar. The first damn thing it does for the big cowboy is buck me off. Now, you got to understand, if you ever were a rodeo guy, it's very offensive to be bucked off by a damn horse in Yugoslavia. So, anyway, I get back on, and I make it. We get going, and we take off. And Jim is coming with me. So I'm guiding him towards it. Well, we hadn't gone more than 3 hours on horseback when all of a sudden the Yugoslav colonel holds his arm up. There were 10 of us. And he talks to Jim like hell. Jim says, we got to hide. We're going to ambush a group of Germans that are coming through here. I said, what? He said, we're going to ambush the Germans. Now, mind you, this is the mountains. Remember your old cowboy and Indian stuff. We're going to cut them off at the pass. That's what they're going to do. And again, I think, what the hell am I doing here? I'm on a horse. I'm in Yugoslavia. I don't even have a gun. I said, Jim, he said, here's a rifle. And he gives me an old British Enfield rifle and a bandolier. And all of a sudden, the last American hero is there. I got a bandolier around me. I got a rifle in my hand. And I'm on my horse, man. Shoot them up. We'll get those Apaches before they get us. Well, what happened? We go into this canyon. They're all dirt roads there. Heavy canyon, lots of rocks. And it was, honest to God, just like the movies. We all hide behind the rocks. We get set up. They had a couple of light machine guns in there. And all of a sudden, chugging down the road come a couple of motorcycles and a command car and a damn Tiger tank. I think, hey, somebody else, not me. But I'm there. I'm behind a rock. I got a rifle. What the hell am I going to do? Watch the action. See what happens. Well, that 2 young little Yugoslav guys go zapping out there. Boom. They throw Molotov cocktails underneath the treads of that car. Grenades or some damn thing into the treads of that tank. They hit that command car, and there's all sorts. Suddenly, explosions are going on. Everything's going. The Germans are jumping out of these damn things, and all of a sudden, everyone around me, bang, bang, bang. They're picking off the Germans. So I thought, hell, I got to be a part of this party. And I was a pretty good shot. So I began shooting at figures running around. I couldn't tell you to this day whether I killed anyone or not. I know damn well I hit one or two. It was just like the damned old movies I used to go to for a dime on Saturday when they had the double feature. You had Buck Jones in one and Ken Maynard in the other. And you'd shoot those guys up, and here we were shooting them up. There was just one problem with it. Remember, I'm Air Force, and I'm used to flak going for plunk or plunk, and I'm used to guns going off, but I ain't used to anyone on the ground shooting at me. This is a very unpleasant experience. For those of you who are in the infantry, it doesn't mean anything. But for a fly boy to be being shot at on the ground, and you hear bullets going whang, 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 and you see splinters rising from the rocks and things like that, hey, I didn't sign up to do this. I wear silver wings, you know. All of a sudden, I was a combat infantryman, cavalry type. Well, I guess it was a draw. We killed a number of them. We didn't lose any of our people. They took off. We took off. And we went another 3 or 4 hours, and by God, I found the airplane. And we got there. Well, let's see. There were 10 guns on that ship, and we were able to salvage 6. 50 caliber guns in excellent condition, believe it or not. A hell of a lot of ammunition. I neglected to say we had a Yugoslav wagon, which is called a kulak, K-O-L-A-K, that we loaded all this stuff on. So we came back, and we had 6 nice guns. We had a bunch of ammunition. So I thought it was pretty super. Well, by this time, I'm kind of hooked on the deal. And I got kind of friendly with this colonel through Jim. We were talking back and forth. He wanted to know all about the American West. Did they carry 2 guns? Did they have pearl handles and all this stuff? You know, Buck Jones carries 2, Ken Maynard 1, that sort of thing. So he asked me if I'd like to go on another raid. And guess what? I went. To make a long story short, I had 3 little adventures. I was an idiot. I never got shot. We didn't lose a man. We had 1 man wounded. I think we raised a lot of hell with the Germans. I saw some things that I shall never forget. I saw an aid station that the partisans had just liberated from the Germans. There were about 50 people in there. One of them was a woman who, to me in those days, was old. She must have been all of 60. They had stretched her leg across a railroad track and beaten her in an iron rod, and they just amputated her leg when I came in. I came into a village there, perhaps 15 little houses, thatched roof houses, little store and so on, and absolutely leveled. They'd come in with Tiger tanks and they just scorched her. And there was a little girl and her family huddled around the remnants of the fireplace there. Sweet little girl. It was cold. It was at night. And they had a little fire they were huddled around. We shared a little food that we had with us. And in my flying coveralls, I had an escape kit that was issued to all of us. It had morphine, it had dexedrine pills, it had Blue Seal money, which you used to bribe people to get out if you could. It had a number of things, some fishing line and things like that. Just a little plastic kit. But I had the beautiful silk scarf with maps of Europe printed on it. And I gave this little girl, who was probably 14 years old, my scarf to tie around her hair, because as I say, tie around her hair. It was very, very cold. And as long as I live, I will never forget seeing that little girl huddled by the fire in the remnants of this village, wearing that quite colorful Air Force map scarf tied around her head. I've never forgotten her. Well, meanwhile, back at the ranch, the boy with the broken leg was suffering quite a bit, but we had it set in a fair way, and time went on, and suddenly a couple of weeks had gone on. And I got mixed up in a few more skirmishes like that. I got to feel I was a part of these people. I had a tremendous admiration for them. They were courageous, independent people. The only thing you didn't like, they had some rat finks with them. You could always tell a rat finks. They wore these little fur hats. When I first moved up to Minnesota 19 years ago, I couldn't believe it in the winter. I thought I was back there, all these guys wearing these fur hats, around here. They were the equivalent of the German Gestapo. Actually, what they were, I don't know what they call them, the GMP or whatever the hell it is today, the Secret Service, the Secret Police, which they had attached to every Yugoslav partisan unit for one sole purpose, to be rat finks to the commissars. You could spot those guys right away, and you hated them automatically, just as the Yugoslavs hated. But the Yugoslavs themselves were wonderful, courageous people. Finally, one day, after a couple of weeks of this, the colonel came to us and through Jim said to us, "We think we're going to be able to get you out with the Russians who are flying these guns in now. We're going to have to load you in the Kolaks under a load of hay and take you about 300 and some miles across the country." At this point, fine. So all of us, all 10 of us, including a guy with a broken leg, are getting this damn wagon, stacked hay all over the top of us. One thing I neglected to mention, the European flea is unlike any flea we've ever seen in our lives. And they love to live in straw, and they love to bite on nice, tender meat. And by the time we were done with that, we were itching and scratching and going absolutely bananas. But nonetheless, we survived. going in these wagons. One night, the moon is half full. It's cold and it's still, and the wagon stops. The driver talks to Jim for a few minutes, and Jim turns to me and says, "We've got a problem here. There's a town up front, a very small town. The Germans are supposed to be out of it, but we aren't sure. Would you be willing to go up and check it?" They had spotted me as a rash, impetuous youth, and I had neglected the fundamental thing one is supposed to learn in the service: never volunteer for anything. Sure, by this time I might tell you I still have my trusty Enfield. So here it is, about midnight, half the moon is showing, dead quiet, and I walk into town. I hit the first streets. The streets are like western towns, board sidewalks. Walking along, clunk, 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 I can hear my own feet. I am suddenly scared to death. Town is as black except for the moonlight shining on. Suddenly I come to a corner and I turn around the corner, zap, right in the gut. An American Tommy gun is stuck in my stomach. Symbol, Amerikansky, Amerikansky. And this voice says, "Hi, my name's Big John. I used to live in Pittsburgh." I'm telling you all, I've been a lucky man all my life, but I mean, I really felt good about that. I said, "Well, hello, John." I said, "I was born in Cincinnati." "What are you doing over here, John?" I mean, here we are, midnight, in a Yugoslav town that's supposed to be occupied by the Germans. I got 9 of my friends in a kulak back here. "What are you doing here, John?" "Well," he says, "I come back to fight for the motherland." He says, "I used to work at the steel mills in Pittsburgh. But," he says, "when they get in trouble, I come back, I fight with my friends." So help me God, that was it. A whole big influx of Yugoslavs had gone over and settled in the coal mines and in the mining, steel mining and the steel mills and so on. This guy had gone back to fight for them. Well, I was with friends right away. We go into the town, they give us something to eat, they run us through the town, they say everything's fine, take off, move on and on and on. It seemed interminably. The fleas are getting worse, but John was a wonderful guy, and I could only think about John. So finally we come to what looks like a rather large pasture in the mountains. And Jim says, "Here we are." What the hell are we doing in a pasture? I could see the lights quite away, the glow you get occasionally from a town over there. He said, "That's Zagreb over there." I said, "Jesus, Jim," I said, "I've been bombing Zagreb with the RAF at night. This is one of our big targets." "Well," he said, "the Russians are going to fly in here and they're going to drop off a bunch of guns for us." And he said, "You're going to see a very unique thing. You're going to see how we unload these C-47s the Russians fly in." Well, I said, "Yeah, but generally about this time of night the RAF is coming over." "Don't worry about it." "Okay, I won't worry." Meantime, I see about 200 women around there. Oh, I might tell you something about the Yugoslavs. They had very, very strong codes of honor. If you make a pass at a woman in the Yugoslav army, you're taken out and shot instantly. They fought long before we had women's lib. They fought side by side with the men. And it was immediate death if you fooled around with one of the women. So, being the young stud, I said, "Jim, what do you guys do when you get horny?" Well, he said, "We have camp followers." And they did. So I'm standing there in this valley, and this rather attractive girl was standing next to me. I said, "Are you in the army?" She said, "No." I said, "Good." Anyway, she could talk a little English, too. And anyway, it looked pretty good. And suddenly Jim says, "No, the flight has been canceled. We're going back to this little village 5 miles from there." So we go back to the village 5 miles from there. My God, they're having a barn dance. I couldn't believe it. We go in there, and there's a guy playing the Jew's harp, a guy playing the fiddle, and a guy playing a bass fiddle. And they're playing like country music. And they're doing all this wonderful Slavic dancing and stuff, and we get in the middle of the dances, and we're dancing with the girls. Here are the girls in the army. They got hand grenades on their belt. They got pistols on their thighs. And we're dancing, all of a sudden I'm dancing with a girl, clink, 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 what's that? My hand grenade, you know. It was an interesting, very interesting experience. And they said, okay, Jim says, sit down, you're going to have a play now. So about 8 guys get up and they put this play on, and guess what the play was about? The play was about those rotten, miserable Chetniks. Chetniks have saved a lot of American lives. So we're in a very difficult political situation. I can't talk about fighting Chetniks, or maybe they've been, these are the worst people. Subsequently, when Tito, after the war was over, Tito nailed Mihailovich, tried him, and executed him, which was one of the great tragedies of the war, because he was a real patriot. Chetniks were real patriots. But again, it was the political thing. Communists against the Mongols. Plus the complications of the Serbians, the Croatians, and right today you see it going on. The stuff that's going on in Yugoslavia today is that sort of thing. Well, at any rate, we go back to the same field the next day, or this, I say field, it was a cow pasture. Finally, about midnight, they light a gooseneck flare at one end, and I hear an airplane. I think, for God's sake, he can't land even a C-47 in this thing. He slipped that damn thing in and he landed. Immediately, 200 women go up and they open the cargo doors of that C-47, and they make a human conveyor belt. You've never seen anything like it. They're passing it right over their heads. This long line loading these wagons with guns that they're unloading. Subsequently, there was an American author who wrote for such non-existent publications as the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's and some of those old goodies, a writer named Corey Ford, and he wrote a wonderful story called The Sweethearts of Tito. That's what these women were. They actually did all the work while the men fought. And they passed this stuff out on a human conveyor line and unloaded it. I thought, gee, and in the meantime, this camp follower girl and I had gotten quite friendly, and she gave me the most gorgeous little .22 automatic pistol you've ever seen in your life. It was chrome-plated, had an ivory handle, and I cherished it for many, many years. It was worn in a hip holster. Strapped it on their hip, either the inside or on the outside, and they carried it for protection. She gave it to me. At any rate, I thought, well, we're going to be getting out of here pretty quick now. Well, those damn Russians came out. The most arrogant, miserable men I have ever met in my life, dressed in full uniform with all their medals clanking on them. So I go up to the Russians, and we'd like to get out of here. My pilot's with me. He says, can't we get out? The Russian says, no. Well, we go, we go. Well, what it turned out, that the 5 Russians had a few sweethearts of Tito of their own. So we have to sit there while they indulge in their animal instincts while we're freezing our tails off out there, which takes them about an hour. Finally, they come back and motion us to get in the aircraft. Then I began to pray again. How are we going to get this clunk with 10 of us and 5 of them off the ground? Well, somehow they got off. They flew us back to Bari, Italy. They put us in a hospital, deloused us, treated our little bites from the fleas. We thought, my heavens, they're going to send us back to the United States now. Wrong! They sent us back to the 449th Bomb Group, where we were generously given 1 week on the Isle of Capri. Now, it rained every single day we were on the Isle of Capri. But no one worried too much about it. And then guess what? We were sent back, and we flew 37 more combat missions. Now, there's a very strange thing happens to you, and those of you who have been in combat will understand me instantly. Someone at dinner tonight was saying, how did you survive these things? Planes on your right, left, blowing up, guys you had breakfast with disappearing. You survived it the same way a combat infantryman did. It could happen to them, but it couldn't happen to you. That was the strange philosophy we had. But the funny thing that happens to you is when it does happen to you, you lose that. So the last 37 missions I flew were mighty hard for me. We flew leads all the way. it took interminably. But I knew now that it could happen to me. So it was difficult. They were rough. We survived it. No one was killed. We had many crash landings. We came out of some horrendous things, all of which are other stories. But we did survive the whole thing. And we had an experience that as long as I ever live, I'll never forget. It was a heartwarming thing. I look at it now, I was an idiot. But I was young. In those days, it wasn't like the Korean War, like the Vietnam War. We knew what we were fighting for. There were no grays. It was black and it was white. And they were going to kill us or we were going to kill them. There was no equivocation. It made it a lot easier. My heart goes out to any Vietnam veteran. I think the way they were treated is disgusting. I think as Americans we should be ashamed of it. And my heart goes out to all of them, and I have the greatest admiration in the world for those people. We didn't have that problem. Everyone cheered us. Everyone bought you a drink. You were the last American heroes. In summing up, and before I get to the few slides I have, which I'll explain about in a minute, I want to read you something. James Jones, who wrote The Naked and the Dead. Oh no, that was Mailer. I forget which one he wrote. James Jones wrote a lot of World War II books. Which one?
Here to Return.
Yeah, Here to Return. That's what I'm trying to think of. I read a quote, 4 or 5 years ago. And I've thought so many times, I read this quote, and it sums up to me what anyone who had combat experience must feel. It sums up what I feel. I'd like to leave you with this before we get into the other. The war cast a long shadow on those of us who were soldiers. And as we walked towards the sunset of our lives, we look back at it and realize how deeply our lives were touched and always will be. And I guess that sums it all up for me. I don't know that I'd ever want to go through it again, but there's no amount of money in the world that could ever buy from me what I learned from that experience. Thank you. Now we're going to have, I want to explain something about these slides to y'all. A very nice friend of mine took some marvelous photographs I collected. I unfortunately had a fire in my office and I lost a great many things. I lost, for example, Marshal Tito's autograph that I got when I was over there, which would be worth a lot of money today, but it's not the money, it's the sentiment. I lost many, many things, but I was able to save some of these photos I'm going to show you tonight. They aren't going to be in any necessary order. I'll tell you about them as they come along. You will excuse what looks like a bright, shiny light in certain spots of them that will detract a bit from it, but they are bright, shiny lights because this guy had to put a bright, shiny light on them to photograph them to make slides out of them. So with that, I shall apologize and see. Now let's see, the top one starts it, I think, right?
You got it, okay?
Well, wait, look.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Is that in focus, folks?
Yeah.
I mean, now don't expect this to be the Academy Award. That is a B-24 that has just had its wing blown off. If I had a pointer, I could show you. That white splash there is the light reflection. As you can see, it's had its wing blown off, its two motors blown off, it's going down, it's in a spin, no one got out.
It's upside down,
It's upside down. Yep.
I don't think it is
No,
upside
the plane's
down.
upside
no,
down.
it flipped over.
Yeah.
The plane had flipped over is what happened. And it's not too clear on this, but in the original photograph, down in the corner, you can see one of the engines with the prop still turning on the thing. But that's what it looked like when one went down. Either that or a big flash of light. I'll see if I... What the hell? Wait, I'm hitting the wrong button. I'm out of focus. All right, now let me see what I... Oh, I think I got it. No? Screwed up again. Which one? Well, this one. Huh? There we go. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, what we've got... Now, which one is the focus? The center button or what?
Yeah,
You got it.
There, is that sharp now?
That's
Yeah.
pretty good. That's good.
Those are a bunch of P-38s. I was telling you about how the fighters like to come through and buzz our field. Well, that was a squadron of P-38s coming through to show us what good things they could do. They are not the ones who hit the hangar, by the way. There is one of them once again. Is that sharper now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. There he's coming in for a landing. He's got his gear down. It's all set to slap her right down on it. They were a wonderfully friendly sight, and we liked them because of those twin booms. They were very easy to identify, as against a P-51 that looks so damn much like a ME-109 that we sometimes shot at our own planes. Right there is again, I'm sorry about this flashlight, but you can see this is how we lined up for our takeoffs, one right after another. That landing field was laid out on the most horrendous mud that you have ever seen in your life. They had wire mesh laid over that. I think a lot of the Navy people did that. And we would take off one right after another. In June, at the invasion of the southern France, as we lined up to take off like that, the first two aircraft that took off blew up in midair about 100 feet off the ground, wiping out the entire crew. We subsequently discovered that there was a spy who was a master sergeant in the Army Air Corps at that time, who was being paid $1,000 a plane by the Germans, and he was planting in the wheel wells. When these wheels, I can't walk this way, when these wheels went up, they retracted up into the wings, and there was a wheel well there. And he would plant these contact bombs in the damn things. When a wheel came up, it would blow the plane up. They got him, and it's not like justice today. He was court-martialed and shot within 1 week. This is a picture of my pilot in the cockpit of a B-24, and you can see when we were in tight formation how close we got into those things. That was for our own protection. There we are dumping. You can see the nose turret is sweeping the sky with his guns, as is the tail, and the ball turret down below you. Those of you who've never seen a 24 or seen a ball turret, that was a heavy cast iron thing, and you had to curl up in a fetal position. That took a small man. It was the most miserable damn job in the world. Just terrible.
Where was the camera? You said the camera?
The camera hatch is right behind that ball turret. That's where we bailed out, just behind that. The waist guns, as you can see sticking out there, those windows on the side. Over here is where I rode, right up in here, and the bombardier was down here. This is where he looked. Nose gunner up there, and my job was to get him out if we got hit, which is quite a bit. That Astrodome where I told you I dropped it is right up there, that little bubble that I shot him when I was going across the country. That is a bomb strike photo. For those of you who've never seen one, taken from about 25,000 feet, you see that railroad bridge there. That's what we were going after there. And those puffs are where we missed it. I mean, it'd be wonderful to tell you that the wonderful Norden bomb sight and the superior American airmen pickle-barreled everything that we ever shot at, but damn it, it didn't work that way. Now there's a very good shot of planes in formation. We were flying number 4 then and shooting towards tail end Charlie, and those are the vapor trails, which in the winter of 1944 were the curse of our flying. It was we fought the weather in some ways as much as we did the enemy. They say it would be 60 degrees below zero, and these vapor trails, of course, just lit up the sky for the German anti-aircraft gunners. We had a paintbrush dragging with us. Happens to be up in the Brenner Pass area. And once again, we were bombing this little rail head up here. You see the pock marks of the bombs around it. We did hit some, unfortunately, it's right under the glare there. But that was in the winter. That happened to be around Christmas Day. Right here, this stack did a hell of a job. It got right on. That was Christmas Day, and I can remember with my great sense of humor going down there, I wasn't flying on that mission. But on Christmas Day, by God, we got to send them a message. And I went down with a piece of chalk, and I chalked on the bombs. Bombs away on Christmas Day makes the Germans stop their play. That was my message. There is one of our giant birds about to land. That's one of our hangars there in the background. There's another bomb strike photo. Actually, this is rather interesting. In the fall of 1944, our group had the distinction of being hit by one of the early German jets, Messerschmitt 262. And I think if they had been allowed to be produced by Mr. Hitler, it would have prolonged the war a considerable amount of time. This happens to be a jet strip that was built. I'll never forget, I was asked at one point to fly Pathfinder for the bomb group, which meant that you got one of those P-38s that I showed you a minute ago. They hollowed out the nose. They call them a droop snoot. And you would ride in the nose laying full length. And you would observe and report back weather and target conditions to the group. There were several problems. First of all, if you landed in one of those damn things and the nose wheel collapsed and you were stretched out in the nose, you were going to be a pancake. The second thing, the jets had come in. And there's nothing better the jets like than to catch a lone P-38 doing about 375 knots and come zapping in them at 500 and some knots and blow them out of the sky. So I said, no, that was for somebody else, not me. There's a very good picture of our formations of the 7 boxes that I was talking about. Those are, down at the lower right-hand corner is the start of the smoke screens of Ploesti. The black splotches are the start of the flak burst coming out. That's the river that runs through it. But those smoke screens were very, very effective and covered the entire target. That's a hell of a good picture of flak over Vienna, and one plane has been hit and streaming out of his number 2 engine. You begin to see some of the flak bursts that were all around us there. It's a pretty dramatic picture. That's been printed in a number of the publications that have come out after World War II. And there we are again, flying up somewhere over the Danube. Again, that's not too tight a formation. I wouldn't be proud of that one. Remember, these pictures are old. An artistic friend of mine took this one, is servicing a P-38 at night. That original slide is in color, and there's a sunset behind it, and it's really quite a dramatic shot. Here we have B-24s flying. Up there we have a B-24 in the upper right-hand corner that's had its entire tail blown off, if you look up there. It's diving straight in. The centrifugal force was such that no one could get out of that aircraft. Right there, we have a B-24 that has been crippled. They come off the target, and you'll see 2 German fighters on the right-hand side coming in for the kill there. That was the end of the ball game for those boys. That's me and a good buddy of mine standing in one of the British Spitfires that shared our field. That's when I was young, happy-go-lucky, and dumb. There's another, this is a tough picture, and unfortunately, this is here, but here's a plane that's on fire. It's going down. You can see him just streaking into the clouds there. We shot down on that flight, obviously, so up above it. And those things really gave you the little loss when that happened. There's another good picture of the flak around Vienna. A lot of that hazy looking stuff is just smoke in the burst. There's what it looked like to be flying a tight formation just before you drop your bombs and be looking up into the bomb bays and hope to God the guy didn't get out of formation and go right over the top of you, which did happen. Occasionally someone dropped their bombs, a whole load of bombs on a plane below them. But I think that's a very, very dramatic shot. Incidentally, there's a story goes with it. If you look at what I call the elephant ears, the rudders on that, you'll see a big white ball up there. That was the insignia of the 450th Bomb Group, which was also in the 47th Wing. See, there were 4 bomb groups in each wing. They were called, for obvious reasons, with that white ball up there, the Cottontail Squadron. Now, a very strange thing happened with the Cottontail Squadron. We'd be flying up, we'd get hit by fighters, and many, many times the fighters would, let's say the 450th, the Cottontail, were flying in a group right behind us. They would pass us up and go after the 450th and just shoot the bejesus out of them. Well, the reason that happened was some dumb young green pilot in the spring of 1944 was attacked and dropped his gear as what I'm trying to say. He dropped his gear to say that I am surrendering. 3 fighters came in to escort him to a German field to land it. He opened up on him, shot the 3 fighters down, jerked his gear up, and got back to the base. Now, from that point on, the 450th Bomb Group was a marked outfit. They changed that squadron insignia. Didn't mean a damn thing. Axis Sally would get on the radio and broadcast every night. It's amazing how she worked. She could tell us what target we were going to the next day before we knew what it was. She said, you boys down at the 450th Bomb Group, just because you changed your insignia, don't think we don't know where you are, and we'll be out there and we'll be after you. There's a bunch of us chugging along. And there's the old Wellington Bomber, the mainstay 2-engine bomber, built out of canvas, gunny sacks, and every other damn thing. And that's the aircraft I flew 11 missions with the British for. It really looks like it's something the Wright brothers would have taken on a few years later. It's a hell of an airplane.
That was geodetic construction, eh?
Yeah, it's got the geodetic construction out of spruce.
A lot of them had Pratt Whitney engines.
Yeah. And they can carry a tremendous bomb load, and they can take a tremendous amount of hits. So I had 11 missions in those little punks. There I am, it's not very good. This is me, and this is my buddy. I'm sitting in the cockpit of one of those old Wimpies, as we call them. That's my hot pilot guy. There's a good shot. Fertile Myrtle. Laying one on a oil tank down there on the river. And she really burbled up for us. You don't often get a column that high where you can get the aircraft as well as a column of smoke up like that. I thought it was very dramatic. That happens to be the Danube. The Blue Danube, which is just about as muddy as the Ohio River. Another bomb got photographed around one of the rivers, I forget which. I think that's the Danube over there. And there is Innsbruck, up in the Brenner Pass, getting a marshalling yard along there. I only throw these in to show what it looked like from that altitude. These are photographs that were taken. There's all your clusters of bombs up in there. Photographs that were taken from the bottom of each ship. It's that camera hatch where the camera was mounted on one of the planes as we bailed out on it. There is the heart of Innsbruck on that same mission. That again is the smoke screens over Ploesti. Look at the lower right, you can see where the pots are starting. You can see how it really did a damn good job of covering up that target. Really was tough to get through that.
But they had to put the smoke pots on different sides of town.
Pardon me?
Would they move the smoke stuff around to be?
They had a hell of a lot of smoke pots. Some of them were mobile, but most of them they had it around. They knew where the prevailing winds were, but they always seemed to be able to do a job on it. That's the heart of Bucharest right there. getting a marshalling yards running down through the town. That was another very difficult target. Once again, some smoke screens, as you see down in the bottom, just starting up. There's a box right below. This is what I was talking about. You see those bombs coming out of there? You see these other planes down there? Well, I don't think they hit anything, but it sure got kind of scary when you got hooked up like that. There's some flak bursts just starting down there in the lower right-hand corner. There is the most horrendous thing you'll ever want to look at. The gunner is dead. His guns are down. Wing tanks have been hit. The whole aircraft is on fire. It's riddled there. You can see it towards the back of the thing. The pieces of metal hanging down. Flames sweeping right through it. I happened to take that picture. And I don't think it was 5 seconds after I took that thing, the whole aircraft just blew up with one horrible flash. And I'll leave you with that picture to show you it wasn't all fun and games. And every time I look at that, I think how blessed I've been in my life. I think about some of my friends who were in that aircraft. Well, if I can find the light switch, put her up. Done it? Yeah. Now, if there are any questions anyone would like to ask me, I guess we got a minute or so. I'll attempt to answer them.
That last picture, was that a picture of Little Warrior? Is that the name of that aircraft? There's a picture similar to that.
There are a lot of these pictures have been printed in either Air Force magazine or some of the different books that you've got. The guy who gave me some of those, that one I happen to have taken myself, but some of these that I got from a friend of mine was a cameraman with the 15th Air Force. I'm sure some of them you may have seen before, but these all came direct from Italy. Yes, sir?
How did you get Tito's autograph?
He was living in a cave up there in the mountains with Randolph Churchill, Winston's son. They were holed up in a cave. That was their headquarters. And this fella, Jim, who I became pretty damn friendly with, said, would you like to meet Marshal Tito? He would like to meet a crew. So 3 of us went up there, sat down with him. He was a hell of a guy. And he's like every damn politician. He reached in his pocket and he had pictures of him, you know, and autographed the damn thing and gave him. He got Winston Churchill's son's picture, Randolph, too.
Henry,
Yes, sir.
I got something for you, but before I give it to you, my name's Vic Harrison. Henry and I are close friends, but I want Charlie Fuzzy to come up here. Don't ask me how a nice sailor like me got hooked up with these 2 Air Force types, but beggars can't be choosers. Charlie was in the 8th Air Force, and he flew in B-17.
The glorious 8th.
The glorious 8th, pardon me. He was a top turret gunner. But what he has brought with him, he recently received the Prisoner of War Medal. And he's brought it with him, and he'll be happy to stay for a minute afterwards and show it to you.
You might add, Vic, that Prisoner of War medal was not awarded until what, Charlie?
Just
2 years ago?
This year.
This year. They fought for years and years and years to get a damn medal if they were prisoners of war.
Now, Henry, I got a little...
Let him show his
sorry.
medal.
That's all right.
Okay.
Oh, hold it up.
He'll have it here if anybody wants to come down when we get through.
Just think, if I'd been captured, I might have ended up as short as he is.
Yeah.
Malnutrition.
Now, the next thing, Henry, I bought this as your Christmas present.
Oh,
Then it
thanks.
dawned on me that you were going to give this speech, so I figured after a lovely speech like this, you should have a fitting reward. Now, knowing how much you like the 50 Mission Crush, at great expense to a lot of your close personal friends like Al and Tom and George here, we had this beautiful statue of you, this bust of you.
Jesus.
And the biggest problem we had was getting the proper crush into that 50 Mission
How the
hat.
hell did you do that? What the hell it even looks like?
In the Navy, this is a 4 URO, but he wouldn't understand that. Thank you.
Well, I certainly am appreciative. Thank you very, very much. Anyone else got any question before we wrap up? Yeah.
When you got back to Italy and went on those 37 missions, did you every time look at that guy with the Bible?
I never looked at the Bible from that day on. And I ignored it in church, I'll tell you that. I'll tell you one other thing. I never flew with the Royal Air Force again either.
How many
Never.
missions did you fly altogether?
What's 50 and 11? 61.
I lost count.
50 legit, 11 cheat.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Henry.
Support for this program provided by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support provided through the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by Barrows Productions.